We are joined now by Sid Lowe. Sid, how did you actually find him to be as an interviewee?
I found him to be, I think, how at least I attempted to portray him, and there's a key part of it where I talk about the slightly contradictory nature of him, and I was really struck by that. I was struck first and foremost, I think, by the evenness of the way that he spoke. He wasn't either especially engaging, nor was he kind of offhand. He was quite even with everything he said. I thought he spoke without cliches for the most part. Said some quite interesting things, in particular the tactical stuff I thought was quite interesting. But I found him contradictory in the sense that he was kind of apologetic about his character, at the same time as he was kind of expressing, I think, that this is what I am and that's great. He also was very clear in saying lots and lots of people have told me to change, which seemed to me to show a degree of self-awareness of his flaws and so on, but clearly only wanted to take that advice from those people who knew him. And so it was quite interesting talking to him, because I thought more than anything else he was quite contradictory, and that actually made it quite a difficult piece to write as well, because trying to sort of, what's the best word, trying to kind of unpack him a little bit, and that was, I found that really, really quite a challenge. Yeah,
well, probably the standout quote from him, I thought anyway, Sid, was when he said, you know, I used to be a lot worse in terms of the intensity and everything that he brings to the game.
Yeah, and funny you should say that. I thought about this was kind of, if you like, the crux for me, that point about I used to be a lot worse, and that for me almost summed it up, because I was tempted to start on that very line, you know, of Luis Suarez saying, I used to be a lot worse. And you almost expect, after a comment like that, a player to be laughing, as if to say, you think I'm bad now, you should have seen me before. But it was delivered so evenly, so deadpan, as if, and it's in a sense that it was him saying, look, I have improved and I have tried, but without it being sort of vindicative. It wasn't him saying, look, you've got to let me off because I'm trying to get somewhere. It wasn't delivered either as a kind of sob story, yet it was at the same time, I think, trying to say to people, you know, cut me some slack here, but without it feeling like that was really what he was getting at. And that's where we come back to this kind of contradictory thing, him saying, I was worse, I've listened to people, I've taken stuff on board, but at the same time clearly aware that there are things that he still does that mean that he perhaps doesn't like those elements of his game, or at least he recognises that other people don't like them. And I thought that remark was significant, and it seems to me that the thread running through what he said during the interview really was one of the sheer number of people who've basically told him to stop behaving the way he is doing.
Yourself and Pete Jensen both got to speak to him, and I guess, I mean, both of you speak fluent Spanish, and this possibly has something to do with why you got to speak to him. What's your sense of how well sort of integrated he is in terms of his ability to speak English, how integrated he is into the kind of community there? Is he still kind of a little bit of a fish out of water?
I must confess, I don't know the answer to that, but on the same day that we spoke to him, he sat and spoke to some of the other newspapers, but did that through an interpreter, which I think at the very least suggests that his English isn't strong enough to deal with kind of complex questions and to at least to deal confidently with that kind of thing. But that said, there was a moment in which he was talking about how his coach with Uruguay, Oscar Tavares, had handled him and how he'd given him some of the pieces of advice. And the reason he then brought up the advice that Steven Gerrard had given him was because one of the questions we asked him was, well, is that harder at a club like Liverpool? Because, you know, you've got the language barrier. It must be much more difficult for people to get through to you and to try and tell you to change certain elements of your behaviour or to channel your energy into certain aspects of the game. And he said, no, the language isn't really a barrier now. But because I didn't speak to him in English, I couldn't tell you that. What certainly was clear, I think, is that away from the pitch, he's not one for going out very much. He's very quiet. I think he's quite domesticated in that sense. So it could well be that there's a certain degree of distance between him and some of the other players. But honestly, I just couldn't give you the answer to that. I mean, it wouldn't be fair to make a call on it.
Sid, did you manage to be convinced by his side of the story with regards to the Evra incident and all that?
It depends what you mean by convinced. As I say, I found him contradictory in terms of the tone of the message that he was giving out and the kind of things he was saying. And I think that contradictory nature was also reflected to some extent in when he talked about what happened. But in some ways I wasn't hugely interested in the rights or wrong of the Evra case, because it seems to me that that's a case that's been tried now. He's been punished for it, and we've poured over it with the FA document. What I really wanted to understand was how he felt about it, rather than necessarily whether he was right or wrong. And so we weren't pushed, and actually, in truth, perhaps we should have pushed him harder on some of the inconsistencies. So we weren't pushing him in terms of saying, why did you say that, or did you say this, or did you say the other? More it was a case of, should you have known better? Should it have been different? Should it have been handled differently? And in that, I found him a little, as I say, a little contradictory, but not contradictory in terms of his evidence. More contradictory, I think, in terms of his emotions. I mean, for example, I got the impression that, and again, this is impressionistic, and you never know for sure, but I got the impression that he has more to say, and he would quite like to say some things, but he now recognises that it's best just to let it go. Yet at the same time, of course, it's difficult to let it go, not least when you've got a couple of journalists asking you about it.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, one of the ways in which journalism is different now from even just a couple of years ago is that everybody can see how everybody else is reacting to a given piece, and certainly the reaction to this underlines, I suppose, how controversial a player Luis Suarez is. You had this, very, very strong opinions on either side. A lot of them seeming to have to do with the club loyalty of the person doing the reacting. I mean, it seems that certainly a lot of people, and a lot of them seem to be Manchester United fans, pretty much every interview with Luis Suarez should be about Suarez, Evra, and really what more is there to say?
Yeah, I think this is an important point, and we can take this away from this issue as well, and perhaps put it onto the John Terry case, and I think there's something ever so slightly depressing about being able to judge the dividing lines in something as important as this based on club allegiances. I do find that worrying in a way as well. So for example, if you asked 100 football fans whether John Terry was guilty or not, then an unusually large proportion of those saying, of course he's innocent, would be Chelsea fans. Equally, an unusually large proportion of those saying, of course Suarez is guilty, might be Manchester United, and of course he's innocent, might be Liverpool. And certainly my experience in terms of the backlash of this, certainly across Twitter, now again, I'm not trying to claim that Twitter is the reflection of absolutely everything, but it did seem to me to be worryingly club-driven. And I found that quite a worry. Although, admittedly, there was also a lot of people who made a lot of very, very good points and picked up on some of the things that perhaps I should have driven through harder, or picked up on some of the inconsistencies that perhaps I didn't make enough of. But it comes back to the point you made at the very start with this question, which I think is a really, really important, certainly from my point of view, from a journalistic point of view, was really important, is that this was nearly a 3,000-word piece. And a bit on racism was a chunk of about 150, 200 words, an issue that in some ways I would almost rather have ignored, but I think it would have looked very weird and would have been not quite right not to have at least asked about it, because, it was a piece about his character, really, and that, of course, it funnels into that. So there is a frustration there to try and talk about why someone is the way they are, and then to have it driven back down again and reduced to, well, did he do it or didn't he do it? Is he a good man? Is he a bad man? And that I find a bit reductionist, not least because once the trial has been done, the investigation in this case has been done, once he's been banned, it seems to me that there's far more mileage in understanding and empathising, and I stress the difference between empathy and sympathy. Understanding and empathising, there's a difference between that and just saying, and I think that's much more valuable than just saying, well, he was wrong, or yes, he was right, or he's a bad man, or he's a good man.
Okay, Sid, thanks a million for all of that.
My pleasure.